Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, 2018 Sourcing and Contract Management Strategies to Watch. We're going to explore recent trends in sourcing and contract lifecycle management and discuss what they mean for your business. The first section of our presentation is going to be an overview of some of the most recent trends based on PayStream data in sourcing and contract lifecycle management. Then we're going to give you an overview of the features and functionality you can expect in the technology. And then we're going to subject matter experts take us through a few recent use cases of sourcing and contract management transformation. And then we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. So if you have any, please submit those during this event. All right, now let me introduce our presenters today. My name is Anna Barnett. I'm a research associate with PayStream Advisors, and I'll be presenting PayStream's latest research on sourcing and contract management today. I have two subject matter experts with me that will be taking us through their own expertise on sourcing and contract management. I have Matthew Markham. He is a VP of Global Sales Engineering and Client Solutions at Determine. Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining us. And I have Matthew's associate, Tim Scott, who's a business consultant manager at Determine. How are you, Tim?
I'm great. How's it going today, Anna?
It's going well. Thank you guys both for being here. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about PayStream. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a team of experts in all things back office processes and technology. That includes everything from sourcing and supply chain to electronic payments and expense management. We use our expertise to help our subscribers and our clients in a couple of ways. The first way is through our free research reports and research tools that are on our website, which is paystreamadvisors.com. And that's where a lot of the information and data that I'm going to discuss today comes from. Our reports, they cover industry trends and adoption rates, and they include profiles of leading software solutions for practitioners to look at. Another way we help our clients is through our thought leadership via speaking engagements, and we do a free webinar almost every week, just like this one. And if you can't attend our live webinar events, they're always available on demand on our website. The final way that we help our clients is through our advisory services. We help companies plan for automation with current state analysis and needs assessments. We help them build an ROI case for automation. We help them choose the right solution for their specific business needs, and sometimes we will help with implementation as well. So let me turn it over to Determine and have them tell you about their company.
All right, so a little bit about Determine here. Determine is a pioneering source-to-pay and enterprise contract lifecycle management company formed in 2015 through the combined expertise of three leading companies across source-to-pay. That would be IASTA for sourcing and supplier management, BPAC in the procure-to-pay, and Selectica in contract management. Our goal is to simplify business complexity so that customers can turn their pain points into insights and challenges in the bottom line results, something we do for more than 250 global customers across many different industries, from financial services to pharmaceuticals, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and others.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. So we're going to get started today by going over some of PayStream's latest research around sourcing and contract management trends. As you know, the main goal of our presentation today is to kind of break down these trends and what they actually mean for you and help you translate them into best practices and strategies for improving your processes, as well as sort of a guide and a look at how companies are using software to improve their processes. So we're going to get started. The first thing I want to go over is laying out exactly what the source-to-settle process means. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but just so we're all on the same page, PayStream defines it as everything from sourcing to spend management, which is what we broadly call reporting and analytics of your spend management data. So that includes the sourcing process, contract management, procurement, accounts payable, supplier management, and spend management. A lot of companies are doing this manually today, or at least certain functions of this process manually. Some of the highest automation rates that we see within this sort of ecosystem is around payables. Typically, companies will automate their electronic payments long before they will automate their sourcing and contract management processes. While any automation is good automation in our book, we see the best practice, the innovative approach to your back office management as a fully automated, holistic source to settle process. So let's take a look and see how many companies are actually automating their entire process. We'll start by taking a look at contract management, or contract lifecycle management as PayStream typically defines it. So at the beginning of every contract lifecycle, there is, of course, the creation, drafting, and authoring of that contract. When we asked our survey respondents, who was typically responsible for that, the majority of companies either said that their legal department authors all contracts or that the owner of the contract uses an old contract and edits it as needed. PayStream typically sees the legal department's involvement with contracts as a best case scenario, but if you're doing that manually, you're still sacrificing a lot of control. The best case scenario is also to have sort of a streamlined process between legal department and the rest of the departments, because a lot of people will need to have their hand in the contract content and life cycle. If you're dealing with heavy paper or sort of Excel spreadsheet type of contract management, then you're losing a lot of accuracy, you're not getting as much transparency, and you're probably leaving out important data that is essential for competitive pricing and supplier risk management and things like that. So I want to bring in Matthew and Tim for this. I know that you guys talk to a lot of organizations that have a variety of methods for authoring their contracts. Their current state can look different depending on industry or revenue. What do you think about some of this data? Does it line up with what you've seen? Let's see, what do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think it definitely, it certainly is in line with a lot of what we see. I think, and Matt will speak better to this in a minute, but I feel like a lot of our clients that we talk to at the prospect level are coming from a system where they're doing things manually, and they don't have any kind of formal way to kind of put everything together and really allow for a good collaboration to take place within the business and with their third parties as well. I guess, Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Most commonly when we run across a new prospect, they're typically using, a shared file folder on the file system where they store a bunch of contracts or templates that they can use to author new ones, or SharePoint is the other common one we'll see where they're, again, using it effectively as a place to put stuff that hopefully they can find later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's important to note here that there isn't one wrong way or right way to manage how you author your process, your contract management processes. The main thing here is you don't want to be doing it manually, and you want to try to put a system in place that is flexible with your current state. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Completely agree. I think you have to have some kind of system to start with that you can build from and really grow and expand your processes.
All right, great. All right, so we'll take a quick break here and do our first poll question. And like I said earlier, you'll need 2 poll questions completed to receive your CPE credit. So continuing on with this sort of idea of the current state, we want to see what your current state is, and we would like to know how you're currently managing your contracts. You have the option of spreadsheets or Microsoft Word, which is a pretty common format. You may be using SharePoint, file folder on network drive, or a standalone contract management solution. Maybe you have already put some automation in place and you're using a strategic solution suite or a homegrown SharePoint type of tool. Or maybe you don't have any, or you have no idea what your company is using, which is fine. So we'll give you a few moments to answer that question. All right, thanks everyone for taking that poll question. You'll have another one a little later on. So we got a pretty diverse mix of results. I see a lot of you are using that sort of Excel spreadsheet method or sort of a homegrown SharePoint. I think that, again, the key is not to look at these trends that we're going through today and think I'm doing it totally wrong, but rather to understand how source-to-settle software technology can meet you where you are and bring you into a more innovative process. So I want to change gears a bit and go into sourcing. This graph in the figure shows current adoption rates of cloud-based e-sourcing technology among our survey respondents. As you can see, most companies are still managing their sourcing process manually. They don't have any technology in place. The second most common is to use an ERP-based sourcing solution. Now, this is one of the most complex processes in your back office, especially if you have a high amount of direct or indirect spend. Most of the respondents in this survey were talking about their indirect sourcing processes. But there's a lot that goes into it. It's a multi-stage project typically, especially if you're sourcing a big procurement contract. And the more manual it is, the more you're at risk of sort of not getting the best deal, of not getting the highest quality suppliers. Unfortunately, sourcing tends to be one of the least automated processes among North American businesses. But we have seen a slight rise in adoption rates, especially as more affordable options are coming on the market, as companies are recognizing the strategic value and the high ROI that automation can bring. So I want to bring in Tim and Matt again. Does this kind of line up when you're talking with companies who are maybe interested in automating their processes with your technology? Are they most often trying to replace a solution, or do they come with a completely manual process? I think it's important that we sort of look at what you're seeing in case anybody in our audience is worried about maybe they're heavily reliant on a homegrown solution and they're worried about the technical architecture that would be involved with adoption. What do you guys typically see?
Well, Matt here, I can certainly take that one. It's interesting. I was a little surprised by this particular chart with the number of people that don't actually have any solution today. The sourcing market is relatively mature, and so the vast majority of people we talk to are either they have no solution at all, or they're replacing a solution that they've had for the last 15 years or so. So it was surprising to see that number be quite so high. But yeah, a little bit of both right now.
Yeah, and I definitely think that one of the big keys that we see with the folks that are coming over with no system is that kind of getting everything into one spot to be able to get the great visibility they need into seeing what's going on with the sourcing events and what's going on in certain categories and commodities has been very, very beneficial for them as they move and transition from either a light system or no system into a more organized system to organize everything into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Along those lines, if we're talking about companies who are either completely manual or replacing a system, this figure in the graph shows some of the challenges that come when you don't have a cloud-based solution. We filtered out in our survey from companies who are completely automated with an innovative, progressive cloud-based solution and those who are either using homegrown or ERP tools or no tools at all. And the top challenges that companies typically see when they're under manual processes is inconsistency among contracts. They have difficulty creating the contracts and negotiating contracts in a cost-effective and smooth manner. Their business processes are slow, and they experience supply chain continuity problems, which is particularly a problem for sort of a larger international company or one with widespread operations and complex supply chain requirements. They're also reporting high risks associated with contracts. Contract terms might be unclear. So these challenges are typically what PayStream has seen year over year. We see a little bit of change, but typically the biggest problem is, poor visibility. You can't really control your contract terms as well as you could, and there's a high amount of risk. Do these line up with the biggest complaints that you hear when you're first meeting with customers and they're trying to get rid of their manual processes? Tim?
Yeah, I definitely think that the inconsistency and the visibility, especially when we're starting to implement with our clients, is probably the quickest wins, and I think the quickest things that we're able to see as we're going through the implementation process is definitely the putting things into one consistent spot and working on a standard workflows that work for different contract types. It certainly helps streamline a lot of the process and make sure that there's no missteps and that the proper decision makers are involved throughout the process.
Yeah, I would echo those same things here. You know, the second one on the list there, the contract creation, negotiation, and management is cumbersome and/or costly. Hear that one a lot, right? Very cumbersome. And it's cumbersome because there's no way to really, without a system in place, there's no way to really track what's going on. And so the visibility here is probably the most key thing that you get out of having solutions like these in place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to that first graph that we looked at as far as the different types of authoring strategies people have in place. There's a wide mix among companies today, and I think a lot of companies, have different authoring methods depending on the contract types. So all of these problems are only exacerbated the more complex your kind of back office state is, and especially the more manual. This slide shows the same thing. It's the main challenges that companies experience if they have a manual sourcing process, and sort of very similar to the contract management. You're dealing with a lot of poor visibility, and that can affect your supply chain operations. We're seeing poor supplier performance and consistency, which goes into just, an inability to really properly vet your suppliers if you're dealing with manual processes. There's also a struggle among companies to gain competitive prices in your sourcing engagements, which can really add up, especially if you have a lot of big sourcing engagements each year. Even if the contract price seems marginal, if you're not scoring highly competitive contracts and extremely cost-effective contracts for each and every one of those, you can lose out on millions of dollars each year. And then general high processing costs, which goes into the time, the labor, the resources that you're spending trying to manage that effectively without the proper tools. So, I'll bring, Tim in again. What do you think about this? Is this what you're seeing? I mean, cost is a pretty general thing, but when you're kind of talking to clients, do you hear more around concerns around the risk and the supply chain, or is the cost the biggest issue?
It's kind of funny. I think that, I think a lot of people tend to they tend to look towards their sourcing solution to help drive down costs. But I really think it does a lot more of the risk mitigation, and I think it does also a lot with helping to reduce friction between, the buyers and the third parties they're trying to partner with. Really kind of setting a level playing field, kind of creating as much ease of access to ask questions, to answer questions, to share information, and to be able to give the most accurate pricing and gain that visibility in is where I see during implementations that we're able to really kind of harness the power of the sourcing tool with the client and really help it resonate with their third parties as well.
I would echo those same things. I would hone in on one in particular, the second one on their poor supplier performance and consistency. To me, what that's getting at is, without a system in place to help manage these things, we talked already, and you'll probably hear it again and again, this whole visibility thing. But visibility within a sourcing process, a single sourcing process is one piece, but visibility across multiple sourcing processes is another thing, right? If you had a bad experience in a sourcing process with one supplier, you might not consider using that supplier again. But if you don't have that data somewhere, it's hard to know that you shouldn't use that supplier again. And so that visibility extends beyond just the one into everything.
Yeah, I think that absolutely turns into also, like, as employee turnover happens at different clients as well, it's certainly very helpful to have an easy-to-access historical record of events you've ran in the past, what suppliers were invited and how they performed during the event as well as post the event.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sure you guys will get into this a little bit later, but PayStream has definitely seen a movement among leading source-to-settle software providers like yourselves towards kind of the strategic spend optimization functionality that creates a holistic relationship between the beginning of the sourcing process and the spend analytics at the end. But we'll jump into that a little bit more later. For now, let's take a break and do our second poll question. And this poll question is just a continuation of our look into the current state under manual or inefficient processes. So we want to know what your biggest challenges are right now, Maybe you are not gaining enough visibility into spend data. Maybe you lack visibility into supplier information. You're having trouble keeping that accurate and updated. Maybe you have issues around measuring supplier performance and risk. Maybe it's just general, slow, cumbersome, and high-cost process. Maybe it's a lack of integration between sourcing and contract creation, which is a big problem for a lot of companies. So I'll give you a few moments to answer that. Okay, thanks everybody for taking that second question. So once again, we have a mix of results, but I see a lot of you have that sort of slow, cumbersome, costly process, and a lot of you reported you're having trouble with visibility. And that's kind of why we included this slide, because we figured that that would be the case. It's a common trend that PayStream has found in their data. And I wanted to, bring up the importance of understanding the risk of poor visibility between your contract management and your sourcing processes in particular. It's important that companies don't just look at their contract management and think, I'm not really sure what's going on, and then look at their sourcing process and think I don't have a lot of visibility. It's important to understand the unique relationship between these two processes and how important it is not only to understand what your current state is in them respectively, but to see how valuable a transparent ecosystem between the two is. When you have silos between your departments, you're really opening yourself up for a lot more risk and regulatory and compliance issues than you would if you had an automation system in place, if you were managing them with very integrated teams. I don't think that people treat these processes in a holistic manner, in this sort of hand-in-hand and completely integrated mindset that they need to. What do you guys think, Tim and Matt? When you're talking to sourcing and contract management teams, do you feel like they have a goal of removing these silos, or do you think it's not enough of a concern for companies?
Well, I can certainly go ahead, Tim.
No, you go ahead, Matt. You're fine.
All right. So in this particular case here, our company Determine is founded on 3 different companies that came together that did pieces of these before. And what's been interesting is as we've done a solution that covers all of these in one solution, is that the number of people who for the first time have found a synergy between them. For example, the contract management team would be building contracts, would have no idea what was going on in the sourcing in the background, and that whole history of why they did a contract that way, which that information was tied back to a sourcing event where, if it was in another system, that data was in the other system, but they didn't know there was a link between the two, and suddenly now you've got the data, but with the 2 different systems in place, you don't know where that connection occurred or why it happened, and it's opened their eyes to how things are tied together much more than they even realized, just by being able to show it in one system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's certainly a heavy cost, kind of the misinformation as things transfer from one to the other. It kind of highlights the importance of, whether it's a system or whether it's just a general and organizational thing, you don't want to have that silo between your 2 systems or between two groups or 2 sets of coworkers that need to work together. And I think, kind of to Matt's point, it was very enlightening as we tried to create the connections between sourcing and contract management, or sourcing and procurement and creation of POs. Almost anywhere within the process on kind of the back office side, it's really important to have that full visibility and to not have any kind of silo separating that information, because when that silo gets put up, there's a chance for misinformation, certainly a missed opportunity for a savings opportunity, or an opportunity for an increased cost that you weren't expecting just because one hand wasn't talking to the other across the organization. So it's very important to have your solutions be able to talk to one another and really work together to optimize everything fully.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think an extra added benefit of creating this holistic environment is the time that you're saving. When you have everybody, in one process, in one system, you don't realize how much time was lost if you're under a manual process and you're trying to track down somebody with the right information or track down the right document. And you really bring that, that buzzword, real time, you really bring that into the whole process, and that can be extremely valuable not only for the process themselves, but for improving supplier relationships and data management in general.
Yeah, and even looking at it, the other surprise was how many of these things, like contract management action, generally happens in real time along with a sourcing event, along with bringing a supplier on board. And if they're in separate systems, that visibility, again, you lose that holistic view if you've got it in three separate systems, where when you do it in one system, you can see where you are in all three of those things simultaneously.
Right. So just to back up what we've been saying with actual data, we asked companies who are using cloud-based sourcing and contract lifecycle management software what benefits they achieved. And as you can see, they gain a lot of the benefits that we've been promising so far. The top most reported benefit was an improved ability to manage contract renewals, which I think one of the big aspects of this is this can be very tedious, and it can also be risky if you're not able to see when things are expiring, when contracts have gone on too long and they're no longer competitive. So a lot of contract management software will allow you to set automatic reminders. They'll make sure that you're up to date on anything that needs to be rechecked. Another big thing which we've talked about over and over again is the compliance and regulatory sort of aspect of contract and sourcing processes. And that was the second most reported benefit, increased compliance with corporate and government regulations. This is extremely important for any company, but especially companies that are dealing with international supply chains, maybe in more regulated industries like healthcare or the public sector. You've also got reduction in legal and labor costs, which is a big thing for companies that might not have their in-house legal department in control of contract management. Maybe they have to outsource that a lot, or maybe they have to hire temporary labor to manage some of the contracts during sort of seasonal fluctuation, or if a big project comes along. You also have more consistent adherence to contract guidelines. So those are the top benefits that PayStream typically sees. And I want to ask you, Tim and Matt, and maybe answer this in twofold. When you've worked with a company and you've put a contract management software in place, can you tell me what the first benefits within the first few months of go live, what the first benefits that people talk about compared to maybe the benefits a year or 2 years down the line when you've actually had time to get used to the solution and you see the longer term ROI? I guess, Tim, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think definitely from an implementation standpoint, the quick initial win or that first 3 months is really, I think, around it's the visibility, kind of this is where our contracts live. This is the status they're in. This is how far along they are. This is the terms, like that quick insight into, oh, I actually have 7 contracts with this client or this vendor. Can I possibly bring those together into one contract and really leverage that and reduce my overall spend down? It really gives that visibility into what different maybe business units or what different parts of our company are doing and how they're using stuff with the vendor. And then I think long term it really gets into that more of that second bullet point there of the compliance and control aspects of it. The costs of auto renewing the wrong contract are more than just the cost of that contract often. And the ability to really have that control over the certain parts of what we call obligation management. Is the contract being adhered against? Are the terms being met? Are we doing our part? Is the third party doing their part? I think that control is what I think people see over time, but the initial win is really in the visibility. I guess, Matt, I'll throw it to you to see if you have any additional points to add on.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I would totally echo that. I'm not surprised to see that the improved ability to manage contract renewals is up there, but I would offer that it's beyond just buy-side contracts. That also plays into sell-side contracts. When you're selling products and services, that certainly plays into it. You want to make sure the renewals happen in a correct and proper way. And so having that visibility to when those renewals or, frankly, expirations are occurring well beforehand is a benefit that works both on buy side and sell side, and that's probably easily the number one thing we hear.
Yeah, thank you guys. So this takes a similar look, but we're looking at eSourcing adoption, and these respondents to this question had an eSourcing cloud-based solution in place. And like we talked about earlier, I touched on this about the increasing importance of sort of the spend management aspect within sourcing and how that's growing in relevance. And we've actually seen that in our data over the past 3 years. We've seen an increase. Value put on the reporting analytics benefit that comes after you automate. So how does this line up with what you guys have seen as far as sourcing adoption? So we already covered contract management, but this reporting analytics focus and this improved visibility focus, is this kind of what people kind of cry out about when you're speaking with them?
I guess, Matt, do you want to take this one first, bud?
Sure. You know, the surprising part is many folks have thought decreased spend is what they would see out of it, and as you see from the results here, yeah, a lot of people did, but not as much as you might think. Certainly, the reporting and analytics and couple that with visibility is certainly the thing that you definitely get the most benefit out of here, and it seems sort of obvious, but it's not, right? You're putting a process in place because you typically didn't have one, or you did it through email, and putting an electronic process in place you would think would give those things, but it's somewhat surprising to people just how much visibility you actually get and just how much ability you have to look back historically and see what you've done. Coming from nothing to that, it's big.
Yeah, I definitely think that the visibility is something that, you know, as sourcing events get ran annually or semi-annually, depending on what their frequency is, you know, the more data you have and the easier it is for you to basically leverage that, the more successful your future events are going to be, especially when you're able to bring in, you know, past supplier performance and other things into that as well to really make the right decision for that commodity or for that product type at the time is critical to really make the right proper decision.
Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, so for this next short section, I'm going to quickly take you through an overview of the main features and functionality found in eSourcing and contract lifecycle management software. So this slide showcases the main features within contract lifecycle management functionality. There are typically 3 basic modules within a solution: creation, tracking, and storage. The contract creation process generally involves templates that are highly customizable, contract authoring tools such as built-in Microsoft Word integrations. After you've created a contract, you go into approval and routing and workflow. Those are highly configurable approval workflows that can go across different departments and can have different controls depending on who's viewing and editing the contract. Then you have collaboration and negotiation both internally and externally, as in collaborating with fellow authors to finalize the contracts and collaborating with the suppliers themselves, as well as negotiating contract terms with the suppliers. Then you've got the monitoring, fulfillment, and archival aspect of the contract lifecycle management tool, which helps you keep track of contract expiration dates and when you need to renew, when you need to reevaluate, when you need to terminate certain contracts. And then finally, you have the reporting, analytics, and risk management, which goes into strategically managing your contracts and your spend to make sure that you have the best, most competitive contracts available to you. This slide goes through the features of a typical leading eSourcing solution, which, like contracts, it starts with the creation aspect of it. You're creating an event for certain sourcing engagement, and this is, again, configurable creation tools, workflows that allow you to collaborate with other members within your organization to make sure you have all of the information you need, templates that you can use to make that easier, the ability to copy old sourcing engagements and edit as needed. Then when you're ready to open that event, you can do a typical traditional event with suppliers within the sourcing network, or you can even do live reverse auctions to allow different suppliers to bid on the event and have a more dynamic, real-time sort of competitive auction. Then you've got the vendor management aspect of it, which is kind of integrated with all the other modules, in that you can use things like supplier scoring that allows you to weigh the value of suppliers based on questionnaire parameters or risk assessment parameters, communicate with vendors in real time. get clarification on documents that vendors send in addition to the document management component of that itself. This is really valuable for identifying the highest quality suppliers in your sourcing engagements. Then you have the awarding aspect of the event once you've found that key supplier or suppliers for your sourcing needs. And then many sourcing tools have contract flip, and this is especially valuable if you're working with a provider that has both sourcing and contract management modules. So once you've awarded that sourcing engagement, it can go directly into a contract. And in some cases, it can even go into a procurement catalog functionality. And then, like I spoke about earlier, the strategic spend optimization, which a lot of sourcing providers are building in as integral components of their functionality. This post-event optimization makes sure that you have achieved the most strategic sourcing and contract engagement with the supplier. It helps you identify savings opportunities. It helps you identify non-competitive contract terms or sourcing strategies. And this is really important for the most innovative and progressive companies who really want to approach sourcing and contract management as more of just a tactical thing they need to automate to save money, but as a strategic value proposition to the company. Here, I want to back up some of the value that I've been touting around source to settle functionality by showing you what our survey respondents have signaled as their most valuable features. And while a lot of companies have chosen supplier scoring or the contract management modules within source to settle as their top, as their most valuable features, it doesn't mean that they're not achieving benefit from all of these features. We just typically see people rate supplier scoring, contract management, RFX template creation as among the top most valuable tools, and that really goes back to sort of the visibility and the control that we saw earlier is so important for companies, and how important that real-time control and the risk management aspect of it as well that you're getting when you have automation in your source to settle process. So I'm going to turn it back over to Determine, and they're going to take you through some real-world examples of how you can apply source to settle automation to improve your business.
Hey, thanks, Anna. We've got a couple of different use cases we want to talk about here. We'll start off here with a very interesting one. All right, so our first example here is a leading global provider of web services, and global is the key word here. This particular group had a procurement team spread all over the world, from Ireland to Singapore to California to Virginia, and so their process was to do all of their sourcing projects via spreadsheets and email. And ultimately what that meant, beyond the obvious poor visibility as to what was going on in any given process at any given time, was because there's no history captured in all of this, they were literally reinventing the wheel every time they did a sourcing project. Not just because they didn't have the data in one system, but because very often the people involved would change, and so all that history was locked up in places where nobody could get at it. And so they were pretty excited to move forward with the tool. And Tim, why don't we take a minute here and have you talk about what it looked like after they did the implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. It was really fascinating to see, especially a global scale company like this that was truly on kind of a Stone Age version with the emails, with everything they were doing. So it was really great to see their eyes kind of light up during the implementation process as we took them through, and we really were able to give them a seamless vendor process from onboarding all the way through to contract. And this really meant collecting all that data into one centralized location, creating the workflows that they needed to have to go through there. It started with a quick supplier onboarding. It allowed for supplier self-registration or invitation through the tool. We were able to collect all of the regulatory requirements that they needed to have, as well as NDAs very quickly and easily, and executed all through DocuSign. So we took a lot of things that were done via email, sending back and forth from a vendor, and we simplified that process for them, giving the vendor one login. They were able to provide all the information that was required, and then bring in the global team to review that information and confirm that this was the right vendor to move forward with, and proceed with either in a sourcing event or into a contract. We definitely were able to help them streamline their sourcing process. Especially in their case, they did a lot of kind of the similar type projects or sourcing projects over time and very consistently in each location that they were building out. So the ability to really see historically who in what geographic or what country area was providing quotes for them, and the quality of the quotes and the quality of the service that they provided if they were awarded, really gave them a extreme amount of power as they're going through and utilizing the tool. They were able to harness quite a bit of the visibility and the general information they were to gather to make the proper business decision at the proper time. They were, as I mentioned, they were able to incorporate their past supplier performance into their current sourcing events to make a more informed and awarding their sourcing decision. And really the visibility all the way from onboarding to sourcing, to taking the items and things that they were getting the bids for during their sourcing events and putting them directly into a contract created a zero loss situation, or didn't allow for any data to seep from one to the other. We were really able to connect them together and really streamline their processes and gain that visibility globally for them.
So our second example here, a leading senior care and facility provider. Let me describe that a little bit. These guys own dozens of properties, or I should say manage dozens of properties across the United States. Some they manage and own directly, and some they manage and are owned by effectively like a franchisee here. So one of their biggest challenges without having even a central repository for contracts was just the visibility into what contracts they had across which facilities, particularly in the case where the facilities were actually owned and managed by a different organization as a franchisee effectively. And so they ended up having data blind spots, right? They didn't have all of the necessary data. They didn't have all the contracts in one place. In many cases, the data that they had was either erroneous or missing. And clearly it was also siloed from the procurement data since they didn't have a particular system in place, which meant that they were making decisions based on incomplete data. So Tim, let's talk about what it looked like after the implementation.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Matt. So, and I think you hit the nail on the head for them. It was a lot of what they were looking for was around visibility and consistency across both the properties that they managed as well as the properties that their franchisees managed as well. So the platform created an interconnected solution to share data for consistency, collaboration, and compliance. They were able to have contracts that are pre-populated with correct fields and associate that with the documents as necessary. They did a lot of kind of the same steps over and over and over again with a lot of their tenants, and this allowed them to have one kind of centralized place to be able to control that and make the changes that are required as needed. It automated their workflows and their e-signature speed and contract creation and approval, and it certainly enhanced their vendor management and spend compliance. They had a much better idea as far as what their true spend was with different third parties, especially when those third parties would be doing work for both the client managed as well as the franchisees managed locations. They were really able to truly harness the power and gain that power that comes from only being able to know what your true spend is across the whole platform, and that the ability to really connect that and that consistency was critical for them as they went through their implementation process. So just taking from a specific use case, let's kind of take a next step, which will be leaning into more generalized best practices in terms of what we see as people kind of look to implement a technology. So we put together what we found from a Determine standpoint, what we found to be the approach for how to approach, I should say, a technology implementation. I guess the first thing is it's not just about the technology. It's really about how do you see your current process and how do you want to build that process in the future so that it will be set up for success and able to grow with you as an organization as you continue to grow. And I think the first step here is that you need to truly deeply understand your business to know what you're trying to change and why. This really gets into what are your current pain points and how does the system help soften those pain points or eliminate those pain points in many cases. And a lot of times it comes back to what we said before, that visibility and that consistency that you're able to create in your workflows and really holding people accountable to what's going on in the tool as well. The next point on here is formulating a continuous change management strategy that spans before, during, and after the continuum. And technology can only make your processes as good as they're willing for the users, the willingness, excuse me, of those users to be involved. I think one of the keys here is that as a project team gets together to implement the technology, it's important to kind of keep the end user in mind, and how do we make sure that it's able to be adopted and utilized in the future. It's certainly one of the big challenges, and really thinking about that change management from the beginning, middle, and end is critical to having a successful implementation and driving that adoption that every tool really wants to have. And then lastly on here, we've got just make sure you have a plan for evolving your business for the future technology that will enable you to do more and do it faster. I think a lot of people, once they're kind of in what we call the go-live status, once they're past implementation and they're really using it and they're seeing all the true benefits within their business, it's really critical for that to kind of be treated more or less as a great first step. And then how do we continue to make small tweaks to continually optimize and improve the process as you get the feedback back from your end users and your third parties around the system. Really continually looking at that and managing that change is critical to what we've seen for our successful clients that are utilizing our tool. With that, I'm gonna pass it back to Anna to see if she's seen similar results based off of what PayStream has got.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. We definitely have come up with very similar kind of onboarding and technology adoption best practices. These are the ones that we most often will give to our consulting clients and our readers. And this is built off of over a decade of client engagements with helping companies understand their current state and helping companies choose sourcing, contract management, technology, as well as engaging with some of the leading providers. The first thing that we advise everybody to do when they're considering adoption of a technology, a source to settle solution in particular, is to develop an onboarding plan. You don't want to go into this blind. You want to have change management strategy set up. You want to have IT infrastructure adoption plan set up. Whenever you're in particular around contract management, when companies are considering moving away from completely manual processes and their existing technology systems, there's a lot of risks that go into that, especially when you're talking about transferring existing contract data to a digital environment. Other things when you're moving from sort of manual sourcing processes or your existing maybe homegrown solutions or ERP solutions that have a lot of sensitive supplier data, or even sensitive supplier relationships that you have if you're doing manual sourcing processes. You want to make sure that you're not just jumping from your current state to your future state without going slowly and considering all the parameters. So basically, in a nutshell, that's build a thorough and carefully laid out onboarding plan. The next thing we always advise people to do is to set up a roadmap. And this is a little bit different than the onboarding plan in that we're talking specifically about source to settle technology features. You need to understand the most important functionality that you need in your current state. And then you need to, kind of like what Tim was saying, you need to understand technology in a scalable way and create a roadmap for the first tools that you want to implement, the first processes that you want to automate, the first things that you want to maybe that you want to revamp and maybe eliminate. Maybe current strategies just aren't working for you. And as you learn about technology and as you do current state assessments, you're going to be able to identify those weak spots in your process more and more. And along those same lines, the third one is to create a current state map to help you with solution configuration. One of the biggest things that we see is when companies agree to automate their processes, when they get their C-suite and stakeholder buy-in for adoption, when they get their investment cash approved, but they don't really take the time to understand their current state, and they don't drill into where they're spending money in their current state, where their process breakdowns and bottlenecks are. And so when they try to plug in that source to settle software, they're often putting a Band-Aid over a broken process. So it's extremely important that you understand your current state as you build your onboarding plan and as you make your source to settle roadmap. because that's going to greatly increase your chance of ROI. And this is, again, so important for the contract management and sourcing processes because of how much sensitive data and sensitive supplier relationships and complex supply chain requirements you have. You need to have a plan. You need to understand where you are before you can get to where you want to go. Again, along those same lines, and this is especially important if you have those current state parameters set up before you do this, but you want to measure your KPIs. The solution, if you measure your current state KPIs, it will really help the solution provider in particular understand where you want to go as far as improvement goals. It will also be great when you're speaking to your stakeholders and your C-suite executives to present these KPIs and to keep presenting them in the months and years after adopting technology so that you can showcase that long-term return on investment, and also so you can get the most out of the software. You don't want to spend a lot of time and resources and money on putting in this best-of-breed leading source-to-settle solution if you're not going to get every single ounce of value out of that. And that's where KPIs come in to make sure that you are seeing that improvement and that you keep accessing all of the value that the solution has for you. Maybe features that you can turn on and off, maybe process re-engineering in a way that will allow you to leverage that technology better. And that kind of leads into the last one. You want to research leading solution providers so that you know what the best is out there and that you can find one that's appropriate for you as well. Measuring those KPIs is really going to be dependent on having, for one, an advanced leading progressive provider, but also having a really good relationship with those solution providers. This basically boils down to do your homework, to talk to as many providers as you can, to leverage that current state assessment to build out your RFP and your solution roadmap and your kind of checklist of key functionalities, priorities versus nice to have, as well as your goals around your ROI goals, your future state goals, and KPIs. And I think that, I'm happy to partner with Determine for this webinar because I think that they're a pretty good example. But, do your homework, learn more about Determine, learn more about the people out there, and that's a great way to make sure that you ensure your ROI from technology adoption. So we're going to go into questions here. And so if anybody had any questions during the event, I think that we might be able to get some of them answered for you. Okay, so I have a first question from Gregory. He says, we're a manufacturing company operating in the U.S. and overseas. Should we automate sourcing contract management first? That's a great question. I'll give that one to Tim. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly it's a challenge that we face with almost every implementation plan that we start off with, especially when multiple modules are involved. I think the answer is a little bit complicated in terms of we can look at going for two different approaches. We go for one that we kind of consider the big bang, which is we'll implement all of the modules for a client at the exact same time and coordinate the efforts and the timing associated with those. The other way to look at it is you can go with kind of more of a phased approach, and you can do one or the other first. I think if you're looking at a phased approach, I think the best answer is really where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck and where's the biggest challenge that you have. I think that it's important to kind of lead with the solution that's going to provide the best value and really help drive adoption because of that. You want to be able to get that quick, easy win and generate that momentum with your end users for the tool, and then move on to the next module, whether that be sourcing or contract management. But I will say that I find that most times, kind of going more with the big bang approach, as we call it, seems to work out the best because it allows your end user to see that connection and really get that visibility between sourcing events and contracts and see the ties and how the tool is going to make their life easier as they transition from one to the other. That really seems to be the best approach we found for most of our clients, but it really is kind of up to each individual client on how they want to see that and where they get the biggest bang for their buck with each implementation.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Tim. Let's do another one. I got one from Melanie. She says, my company has spent a lot of money developing a homegrown sourcing tool, but it's not working. What's the best way to gain buy-in to replace the tool? Let's give that one to Matt. What do you think, Matt?
Well, it's certainly one I've seen before. Not an uncommon thing. The challenge is always when you develop an in-house tool or a homegrown tool, it's generally tied tightly to how your company does business today. And when someone says that the product isn't working the way we thought it would, the best approach in my mind is to start with a bit of education. And so that means looking around at all the other vendors that are out there that offers sort of package solutions to that. Because often what you'll find is that there are things you never considered about how you might do business if you had a different tool. And sometimes the business process improvement is way more important than the actual tool you're using. And so education, step one.
Makes sense. Thanks. I got another short one that I will give to you, Matt, as well. Sarah says, does the Determine solution offer buy-side contract functionality?
Yeah, that's the cool part about our platform is although the contract management portion is built on ultimately a procurement platform, it was intended to be enterprise contract management, meaning we handle both buy-side and sell-side contracts with ease.
Cool. All right, that's about the time we have for questions. Thank you guys so much. All right, so that's the time that we have today. I want to thank everybody for participating. If we didn't get to your questions that you sent during the event, we will get to them shortly after via email. Thank you, Matt and Tim, very much for your knowledge that you shared with us. And I hope everyone has a really great afternoon.